It was a regular day for the FBI director. After decades of service, he had grown accustomed to the rhythm of his responsibilities, the careful balancing of high-level decisions, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing he was making a difference. That morning had been filled with briefings, meetings, and discussions that demanded focus and precision. He moved from one room to another, exchanging professional greetings with colleagues, sharing quiet jokes with staff, and ensuring that every detail of ongoing investigations was in order. By late afternoon, the schedule started to wind down. The director felt the familiar sense of relief that came with completing a day packed with responsibilities. He had always been someone who appreciated the small moments of normalcy that life outside the office could provide. Driving himself home had become one of those simple pleasures. No entourage, no flash of lights, no layers of security. Just him, his car, and the quiet hum of the highway beneath him. The traffic was moderate that evening. People were returning from work. Some hurried, others relaxed, each absorbed in their own thoughts. The director appreciated these times, moments when he could blend into the everyday flow of life. Yet even in these ordinary moments, he remained alert. Years in law enforcement had honed his instincts, making him aware of every movement, every car that drove too close, every unusual gesture from other drivers. As he merged onto the highway, he noticed the setting sun casting long shadows across the asphalt. The city seemed to slow as evening approached, the hectic pace of the day giving way to the calm of nightfall. He thought about dinner with his family, the comfort of home, and the stories he would hear from his children about their day. The small joys of life outside the office had become increasingly precious over the years. Without warning, he saw flashing lights in his rearview mirror. At first, he assumed it was a routine traffic stop, a simple mistake, or perhaps a call for a minor infraction. He slowed down, signaling his intention to pull over. He kept his hands on the wheel, moving deliberately, the calm, controlled demeanor that had served him so well in critical situations firmly in place. As the car came to a stop on the side of the highway, the red and blue lights reflected off the windows, casting shifting colors across the dashboard. The director waited, observing the approaching officer. There was a sense of familiarity in the procedure, the way officers approached vehicles, but something about this stop felt different. His instincts told him to pay close attention. The officer approached cautiously, hand near the holster. The director, understanding the seriousness of the situation, stayed composed. He did not reach for his identification immediately, knowing that sudden movements could escalate tension. His voice, calm and measured, greeted the officer politely. He answered the first questions with honesty and clarity, careful to maintain a tone that conveyed respect and cooperation. Despite the director's composed behavior, the officer seemed tense, perhaps nervous. There was a rigidness in his posture, a sharpness in his movements that suggested he was on edge. The director noticed the signs immediately: the tight grip on the radio, the scanning of the surroundings, the quick, alert glances to other vehicles passing by. He realized that the officer might be reacting to stress or recent incidents, overcompensating for a perceived threat. In moments like these, training and experience mattered. The director kept his hands visible, spoke slowly, and avoided sudden gestures. He was aware of the irony of the situation. A lifetime of law enforcement experience, standing firmly on principles of justice, now facing a potentially dangerous misunderstanding with another officer. The thought was surreal, yet he managed to maintain composure, relying on the skills and discipline honed over decades. He could see the hesitation in the officer's eyes, the tension that seemed to tighten with each passing second. Communication became critical. The director explained calmly who he was, offering credentials and identification in a measured way. Each movement, each word was calculated to convey honesty, clarity, and a lack of threat. Yet the situation did not immediately improve. The officer remained cautious, keeping his hand near his weapon, scanning the car for any perceived danger. Around them, life continued at a normal pace. Drivers passed by, unaware of the high-stakes situation unfolding on the side of the highway. Some slowed down slightly, noticing the flashing lights and the careful movements of both men. Others were completely absorbed in their own routines, oblivious to the drama playing out in real time. Inside the car, the director felt a mix of tension and determination. He understood the potential danger, the risk that a misunderstanding could escalate into something tragic. His mind raced through the best ways to de-escalate the situation without compromising safety. Years of experience in high-pressure environments guided his decisions, keeping his thoughts clear and focused. The officer's approach remained cautious. Every step seemed measured, almost hesitant. The director responded with patience, answering questions as thoroughly as possible while maintaining a calm demeanor. He knew that showing fear or impatience could worsen the situation, and he consciously kept his movements slow and deliberate. The minutes stretched on, each one heavy with unspoken tension. The director's mind reflected on the unpredictability of life, how even the most routine moments could turn extraordinary in a matter of seconds. He thought about the countless cases he had worked on, the lives impacted, the risks taken, and the principles upheld. Yet nothing in his career had quite prepared him for being on the receiving end of a gunpoint stop, his authority unrecognized in the moment. He observed the surroundings carefully, noting the passing cars, the light fading in the sky, and the faint sounds of distant city life. He understood that the officer was likely reacting to training, to protocol, and perhaps to anxiety. There was a human side to this tension, a shared responsibility to maintain safety. The director remained calm, hoping that clear communication would eventually resolve the situation. Finally, a slight shift occurred. The officer asked more detailed questions, his voice still cautious but less rigid. The director responded clearly, presenting his credentials and explaining his position in a calm, controlled manner. It was a delicate balance, asserting identity without challenging authority, maintaining composure without appearing evasive. Throughout the exchange, the director's professionalism and calm demeanor were evident. He understood that patience, clarity, and respect were the keys to de-escalation. His years of experience had taught him that situations like this required careful navigation, an understanding of human psychology, and the ability to remain composed under pressure. As the tension lingered, the director reflected on the unpredictability of life and the fragility of perception. He knew that even experienced law enforcement officers could misinterpret situations, that human error could lead to dangerous misunderstandings. He maintained his focus, waiting for the right moment to provide clarity and resolution. The roadside was quiet, the city beginning to settle into evening. The director remained poised, his mind calm despite the high-stakes situation. Each word, each gesture was chosen with care, aimed at ensuring safety for both himself and the officer. In those moments, the director's thoughts were both practical and reflective. He considered the training, discipline, and judgment required in law enforcement, as well as the human factors that could lead to misjudgment. He recognized the vulnerability inherent in every interaction and the importance of patience, communication, and clarity. The situation on the highway was tense, but it was also a testament to the professionalism and composure that the director had cultivated over decades. He remained aware of the risks, yet he relied on his experience, training, and careful judgment to navigate the encounter. Time moved slowly. Each second seemed drawn out, yet the director maintained his poise. He understood that resolving the situation required not just presenting credentials, but demonstrating calm, reasoned judgment. He remained focused, his movements deliberate, his voice steady, his mind clear. As the part of the story unfolds, the tension on the roadside illustrates the unpredictable nature of life, even for those accustomed to high-stakes environments. The director's ability to remain calm and professional under pressure highlights the human capacity for resilience, patience, and careful reasoning in the face of potential danger. It is a moment that combines suspense, reflection, and the complexity of human interaction in a high-pressure scenario, setting the stage for what will unfold next. The situation on the roadside was tense, yet the FBI director remained calm. He understood that any sudden move could escalate the situation dangerously, so he kept his hands clearly visible on the steering wheel. The officer, a young man with a determined yet anxious look, kept his gun drawn, scanning the interior of the car and occasionally glancing at the surroundings. The tension in the air was palpable, a mixture of fear, protocol, and human error. The director's voice was steady and polite as he addressed the officer, answering questions slowly and deliberately. He could feel the officer's uncertainty, the way each movement was cautious, almost rigid. He knew that the officer was likely acting on a mix of training in nerves, and that the best way to prevent a mistake was to remain calm, communicate clearly, and show that he was no threat. "Sir, I understand you are following procedure," the director said, trying to reassure the officer. "But I am an FBI agent. Here is my identification. I mean no harm." The officer hesitated, his eyes flicking to the credentials and back to the director's face. The gesture of presenting ID was meant to de-escalate, but the officer still seemed uncertain. His hand stayed near the weapon, a sign of tension that spoke volumes about the pressure he was feeling. Around them, the normal rhythm of traffic continued. Drivers passed by, some slowing down to look at the flashing lights, others moving along without noticing the unusual event. The setting sun cast long shadows across the highway, and the faint hum of cars created a backdrop that contrasted sharply with the intensity of the encounter. The director noticed the small details, the officer's rapid breathing, the subtle shifts in stance, the way his eyes scanned the area. He understood that fear could make even trained individuals react unpredictably. He also knew that in these moments, patience and careful communication could prevent disaster. The officer's radio crackled, bringing brief moments of distraction. He spoke quickly, providing a description of the car and the situation. The director remained still, listening and waiting. He understood that the officer was seeking confirmation, a way to reconcile what he was seeing with what he expected. The director's calm presence was a stabilizing factor, even as the situation hung on a knife's edge. The director tried to engage the officer in conversation, speaking slowly and clearly. "I am traveling home from work. I drive myself sometimes. I am not a threat. My identification is valid, and I can provide contact to confirm my identity. Please lower your weapon and let's resolve this safely." It was a delicate balance. Too much insistence could make the officer feel threatened. Too little could leave the officer unsure. The director understood the human psychology at play, the fear and responsibility weighing on the officer's mind. He remained respectful, knowing that authority alone would not resolve the situation. Trust and patience were required. Several minutes passed with tense back and forth. The officer's body language showed that he was slowly processing the information, his focus shifting between the director, the car, and the radio. The director's heart remained steady, but his mind raced through possible outcomes. He considered what steps would be safest to ensure that both he and the officer emerged from this without injury. In the midst of this, the director reflected on the fragility of human perception. Despite decades of experience, despite holding one of the highest positions in federal law enforcement, he was subject to the same vulnerabilities as anyone else. Misunderstandings could occur in an instant, and they could have dire consequences. He felt the weight of responsibility, not just for himself, but for the officer and anyone who might be affected by the situation. The officer finally spoke, his voice slightly less tense. He asked for further verification, his words careful, almost hesitant. The director provided the requested details calmly, explaining his role and offering additional credentials. He emphasized cooperation, understanding, and the desire to prevent any harm. Nearby, some drivers slowed to observe, sensing that something unusual was happening. A few whispered to passengers, speculating quietly. Others simply watched the flashing lights and the careful movements on the side of the highway. The ordinary world continued around them, indifferent to the intense, life-altering moment unfolding in a single car. The director thought about the broader implications of this event. Miscommunication, human error, and fear could all contribute to situations that escalate quickly. He considered how training, awareness, and careful judgment were critical in law enforcement. Even the most experienced officers could make mistakes if context and communication were unclear. He also considered the officer as a person, not just a uniform. Nervous, young, likely new to situations requiring rapid judgment under pressure, the officer's reactions were human. The director's goal was to guide, to calm, to prevent disaster through understanding and clear communication rather than confrontation. Slowly, the tension began to ease. The officer's movements became less rigid, his focus more receptive. The director continued to speak in calm, measured tones, repeating key points about identity, purpose, and cooperation. Each word was chosen to reassure, to reduce fear, and to restore rational thinking. The minutes stretched, each moment filled with anticipation. The director kept his eyes on the officer, maintaining a respectful yet confident demeanor. He knew that patience was essential, that rushing could provoke a dangerous reaction. He was aware that the officer's adrenaline and responsibility weighed heavily, and that careful guidance was the key to resolution. Then, a slight change occurred. The officer requested to see additional identification, this time specific to federal credentials. The director complied immediately, handing over the documentation with deliberate calm. The officer examined the credentials carefully, his body slowly relaxing. The gun remained in hand, but the tension had begun to ease noticeably. The director reflected on the surreal nature of the situation. A lifetime in law enforcement had not prepared him for being held at gunpoint by another officer, for the vulnerability of status and position to be challenged by fear and miscommunication. Yet he remained composed, understanding that his calm, patient demeanor was the most effective tool for resolution. Finally, the officer lowered his weapon slightly, a sign of cautious acknowledgement. He spoke more openly now, asking clarifying questions about the director's role and purpose. The director responded clearly and respectfully, providing the necessary context while maintaining composure. Throughout the exchange, the director remained acutely aware of every detail: the officer's movements, the surrounding traffic, the fading light, the subtle cues that indicated progress. Each moment was a careful negotiation, a dance of trust, communication, and patience. Eventually, the officer's demeanor shifted further. Confidence replaced fear. Understanding replaced uncertainty. The gun was lowered completely, and the officer acknowledged the director's identity and credentials. Relief began to settle in, though caution remained a necessary part of the interaction. The director allowed himself a quiet moment of reflection. The incident highlighted the unpredictable nature of human behavior, the critical importance of clear communication, and the vulnerability inherent in every high-stakes interaction. He understood that his calm, patient approach had prevented escalation, and he felt gratitude for the officer's eventual recognition and professionalism. As the traffic moved steadily, the director and officer completed the remaining formalities. The officer issued a brief apology for the misunderstanding, and the director acknowledged it with grace, understanding that errors and fear could affect anyone. There was no anger, no resentment, only the recognition of human fallibility and the value of patience, composure, and mutual respect. By the end of the encounter, both men had navigated a dangerous misunderstanding without harm. The director resumed his journey home, his thoughts reflecting on the importance of awareness, communication, and empathy in law enforcement. The officer returned to duty, likely carrying the weight of the lesson learned, a reminder of the critical role of careful judgment and human understanding. The incident would leave an impression on both men, a story of tension, patience, and resolution. It would serve as a reminder of how even experienced professionals could encounter unexpected danger, and how human instincts, communication, and composure could determine the outcome. The director continued driving, the normal rhythm of the highway gradually returning, carrying with him reflections on the unpredictable nature of life and the importance of patience and understanding in moments of crisis. The situation, though beginning to stabilize, still carried a heavy weight of tension. The FBI director could feel his heart beating steadily but firmly, each beat reminding him that despite his experience and authority, he was at the mercy of a single decision in that moment. The officer, although slowly becoming calmer, still held a cautious demeanor, unsure whether the information presented was complete or reliable. The air between them was thick with unspoken pressure, and the director understood that this was not just about identification. It was about trust, perception, and the human mind under stress. The director tried to maintain a calm conversation. He spoke gently but clearly, emphasizing his cooperation and intent. He avoided sounding commanding, knowing that the officer might respond negatively to perceived authority. Instead, he aimed to humanize the encounter, speaking of his work, the routine of his day, and his simple intent to return home. He described his schedule, the meetings, the long hours, and the exhaustion that comes after important decisions and responsibility. It was not to impress but to create understanding, to remind the officer that he was human, just like anyone else who could be nervous in a high-stakes situation. The officer listened carefully but remained on edge. His hand, once slightly relaxed, now returned closer to his holster as a subconscious gesture of preparedness. The director noticed the tension and spoke in a lower tone, a voice that conveyed empathy without diminishing authority. He acknowledged the officer's duty, the responsibility he carried, and how it was natural to react with caution when faced with uncertainty. It was an attempt to build rapport, to remind the officer that both shared the same goal: safety. Minutes stretched, feeling like hours. The director observed the officer's breathing, his slight twitching, the way his eyes scanned the environment. It was a display of human instincts responding to fear and uncertainty. In these moments, experience mattered, but so did patience and the ability to remain emotionally grounded. The director focused on his breathing, ensuring that his body language remained calm and his voice steady. He knew that any sudden movement or raised tone could provoke a reflex that neither of them wanted. Around them, the world seemed to carry on without notice. Cars passed, some slowing, others oblivious. The faint sounds of tires against asphalt, the distant murmur of a city settling into evening, all contrasted sharply with the intensity of the roadside encounter. The director considered the irony. Here he was, one of the highest-ranking law enforcement officials, caught in a moment where ordinary life and extraordinary stakes intersected in a single, fragile scenario. The officer finally spoke again, asking specific questions about the director's credentials and affiliations. The director responded carefully, providing every detail requested. Each piece of information was delivered calmly, with no hint of impatience. He realized that in moments like these, clarity and repetition were more effective than argument or insistence. Every word, every gesture was an opportunity to reinforce trust and reduce tension. As the conversation continued, a subtle change occurred. The officer's body language, while still cautious, started to relax slightly. His hand moved lower, the tightness around his eyes lessened. It was not a complete release of tension, but a sign that communication was beginning to work. The director continued to reinforce the idea of safety and cooperation, emphasizing that he meant no harm and was fully compliant with instructions. In these moments, the director reflected on the human mind's capacity for both fear and reason. He thought about how stress can cloud judgment, how adrenaline can amplify perceived threats, and how careful guidance and calm communication can redirect attention to logic and understanding. He understood that this encounter was as much psychological as it was procedural. Nearby drivers occasionally glanced toward the scene. Some slowed, curious but careful not to interfere. Others whispered to passengers, speculating quietly. A few were unaware entirely, absorbed in their own routines. The normal world moved alongside the tension, highlighting how a single moment could feel isolated and intense to those involved, while almost invisible to everyone else. The director remained patient, emphasizing small steps. He suggested calmly that the officer contact headquarters to verify his identity if needed. He offered further clarification about his travels, his vehicle, and the context of his presence on that road. Each step was a calculated move to reduce uncertainty and demonstrate transparency. The officer's responses were still cautious but increasingly receptive. He asked clarifying questions about the director's duties, seeking confirmation rather than confrontation. The director provided honest, clear answers, never raising his voice, never making sudden movements. He allowed the officer to take the lead in deciding what steps were necessary for resolution. It was a delicate dance of patience, trust, and professional respect. During the exchange, the director considered the broader implications. Misunderstandings like this could occur anywhere to anyone. The potential for error was present even in highly trained individuals, and fear could magnify small uncertainties into significant threats. The director reflected on his role in guiding not just law enforcement operations, but also human behavior in moments of uncertainty. His calm approach was not just about personal safety, but about ensuring a safe outcome for all involved. Several more minutes passed with a careful, measured back and forth. The officer began lowering his defensive stance further, asking to examine additional documentation. The director handed over the materials calmly, reinforcing transparency and cooperation. He remained aware of subtle cues, the relaxation of the officer's posture, the less frequent glances at his surroundings, the slower, steadier breathing. A quiet understanding began to emerge. The officer's gaze softened slightly, a tentative trust forming. The director continued to speak in a calm, measured voice, acknowledging the officer's duty and responsibility, expressing empathy for the stress inherent in law enforcement work, and reinforcing his own intent of peaceful compliance. The situation, once fraught with tension, began to shift gradually toward resolution. The director noted the irony of the situation. Here he was, someone who had spent decades enforcing the law and ensuring public safety, now relying entirely on patience, communication, and empathy to navigate a roadside misunderstanding. The experience was a stark reminder that authority alone could not always guarantee safety. Human perception, emotion, and reaction played equally crucial roles. Around them, the setting sun dipped lower, casting the highway in warm, fading light. The sounds of traffic provided a subtle rhythm to the encounter, a reminder of life continuing despite the intense personal stakes. The director remained calm, focusing on the task at hand, guiding the interaction toward safety and understanding. Eventually, the officer's defensive posture eased further. He spoke more openly, acknowledging the credentials and explanations provided. There was still caution, but now it was paired with recognition and a willingness to listen. The director continued to maintain a composed presence, reinforcing cooperation and trust with every word and gesture. In these moments, both men were engaged in an unspoken negotiation of human understanding. The director's calm, patient approach helped the officer transition from fear to recognition, from suspicion to trust. The careful, deliberate steps taken over minutes were slowly reshaping the encounter, from potentially dangerous to controlled and safe. The director thought about the lessons embedded in this experience. Miscommunication and fear could escalate situations quickly, but patience, empathy, and clear communication could resolve even high-stakes misunderstandings. He reflected on how human behavior, both under stress and in routine decision-making, required careful navigation and respect. Finally, the officer's tension eased substantially. The weapon, once held with rigid readiness, was lowered completely. The officer acknowledged the director's identity and credentials, a small but significant victory in restoring safety and trust. Relief began to seep into the atmosphere, though both men remained cautious, aware of the fragility of the moment. The director allowed himself a brief, inward sigh of relief. He had navigated an intensely dangerous misunderstanding through calm, reasoned communication, patience, and empathy. The officer, now more relaxed, began to follow protocol for verifying information, guided by the director's cooperation and transparency. As the encounter neared its conclusion, the director reflected on the human elements that had shaped it: fear, perception, responsibility, and trust. He understood that no training or rank could fully eliminate vulnerability, but thoughtful communication and composure could mitigate risk and guide outcomes toward safety. The tension that had gripped the roadside began to dissipate entirely. Both men had navigated a delicate, high-stakes moment without harm. The director's calm, patient approach had helped transform fear and uncertainty into understanding and resolution. As he prepared to resume his journey home, he carried with him not just relief, but a renewed awareness of the human factors that influence every decision, every reaction, and every interaction, no matter how ordinary it may seem. The tension that had hung over the roadside for what felt like hours began to shift, but the FBI director remained vigilant. He knew that the situation could change at any moment, and that even small misunderstandings could escalate. The officer, now holding his weapon at a less threatening angle, seemed to be processing the information more carefully, though caution still marked every movement. The director understood that the officer was grappling with the responsibility of ensuring public safety while confronting uncertainty. The director spoke calmly, carefully explaining his background and the purpose of his journey. He maintained a steady tone, hoping to convey transparency and sincerity. Each word was chosen to reassure the officer that there was no threat, while also establishing trust. He emphasized cooperation, patience, and the mutual goal of a safe resolution. Nearby, the ordinary world continued, oblivious to the intensity of the encounter. Drivers passed by, some casting curious glances, others completely absorbed in their own lives. The sun dipped lower, casting the highway in a soft amber glow. The traffic created a gentle background hum, that contrasted sharply with the high stakes of the roadside confrontation. For the director and the officer, these moments were suspended in a bubble of tension, a private world of fear, responsibility, and human instinct. The officer requested more verification, seeking confirmation from headquarters. The director complied, providing additional credentials and contact information. The officer spoke over the radio, his voice a mixture of caution and the growing realization that the situation might not be what he initially believed. The director observed carefully, noting subtle changes in posture, breathing, and eye movement that indicated progress toward understanding. It became evident that communication was the key to de-escalation. The director continued to speak in measured, empathetic tones, reinforcing cooperation while recognizing the officer's duty. He acknowledged the difficulty of the officer's position, the responsibility of making decisions under stress, and the human tendency to react to perceived threats. By framing the conversation in a human context, the director helped bridge the gap between fear and reason. Minutes passed as headquarters verified the information. The officer remained vigilant, but his stance gradually relaxed. The tension that had gripped the roadside began to ease, replaced by cautious recognition and a tentative sense of safety. The director maintained a composed presence, his calm demeanor providing a stabilizing influence that allowed the officer to navigate the verification process without panic or error. The director reflected on the irony of the situation. Despite decades of service in law enforcement, he had found himself in a position of vulnerability, held at gunpoint by someone trained to protect the public. The incident underscored the fragility of perception, the speed at which fear could influence judgment, and the importance of patience, communication, and empathy in high-stakes interactions. The officer completed the verification process, and it became clear that the credentials and explanations were legitimate. Relief began to show in his expression, a softening of the jaw, a slight loosening of posture, and a reduction in the tension of his movements. The gun was lowered fully, and the officer acknowledged the director's identity and position. A quiet understanding emerged, a mutual recognition of human vulnerability and responsibility. Even as the immediate danger receded, the director remained alert. He continued to communicate respectfully, reinforcing cooperation and emphasizing safety. The officer, now more relaxed, expressed acknowledgement of the misunderstanding and gratitude for the director's calm handling of the situation. There was no blame, no anger, only recognition of the human factors that had contributed to the high-stakes encounter. The director reflected on the broader lessons of the event. Miscommunication, fear, and incomplete information could lead to dangerous situations, even among trained professionals. Patience, empathy, and clear communication were essential tools in navigating human behavior under stress. The experience highlighted the value of understanding, perspective, and composure in resolving potentially life-threatening encounters. As the highway returned to its ordinary rhythm, the director and the officer completed the remaining formalities. The officer issued a brief apology, acknowledging the mistake without defensiveness. The director responded with grace, emphasizing understanding rather than judgment. The exchange was professional, human, and reflective of the complex dynamics at play in law enforcement interactions. The director resumed his journey home, his thoughts heavy with reflection. He considered the lessons for himself, for law enforcement as a whole, and for anyone who might find themselves in high-stakes situations caused by miscommunication or fear. The experience was a reminder that authority and experience, while important, were not guarantees of safety. Human perception, emotion, and response were equally critical factors. The highway stretched ahead, bathed in the warm glow of evening light. The director remained thoughtful, processing the sequence of events and the emotions involved. He considered how trust, patience, and clear communication had prevented a potentially tragic outcome. He thought about the officer, young and well-intentioned, navigating the stress and responsibility of the situation with cautious diligence. Both had learned something valuable: the power of calm, measured action, and the necessity of understanding human behavior under pressure. The director also contemplated the impact of such incidents on public perception and law enforcement practices. Misunderstandings could occur anywhere, and the consequences could be severe. Training, awareness, and empathy were essential to prevent escalation and ensure the safety of all involved. The director felt a renewed sense of responsibility to advocate for these principles within law enforcement, emphasizing human understanding alongside technical skill. The officer, having recognized the mistake, began to reflect on his own actions. He had followed protocol as best as he understood it, yet fear and uncertainty had led to a tense and dangerous situation. The director's calm and cooperative approach had been instrumental in resolving the encounter safely. Both men carried the weight of the experience, a reminder of the delicate balance between responsibility and human vulnerability. As the director drove, he thought about the unpredictability of life and the importance of composure in critical moments. He realized that even those trained to enforce the law could encounter unexpected challenges and dangers. Patience, empathy, and careful communication were not just tools for law enforcement. They were tools for navigating life itself. The evening air was cool, the city lights beginning to shimmer in the distance. The director's thoughts turned to home, to family, and to the small comforts that awaited him after a long day. The incident, though tense and unsettling, had reinforced his appreciation for normalcy, for routine, and for the human connections that grounded him amidst responsibility and authority. As he neared his destination, the director allowed himself a quiet sense of relief. The misunderstanding had been resolved safely. The officer had acted professionally once the truth was clear, and no harm had come to anyone. The experience would remain with him, a vivid memory of the fragility and complexity of human interaction, the unpredictable nature of life, and the power of calm, reasoned action in the face of danger. Even as he parked and stepped into the quiet of home, the director reflected on the broader significance of the event. It was a story not just of personal experience, but of lessons for law enforcement, for public safety, and for human understanding. Fear, miscommunication, and uncertainty could create life-threatening moments, but patience, empathy, and clarity could prevent tragedy and foster trust. The evening had been a stark reminder of these truths, shaping both the director and the officer in ways that would last far beyond that tense stretch of highway. The night had fully settled when the FBI director finally made it home, but the events of the evening lingered in his mind. Every detail replayed: the flashing lights, the tension, the careful negotiation of words and gestures. He parked his car and sat quietly for a moment, letting the adrenaline fade and reflecting on the extraordinary experience he had just endured. Even with years of training and decades of service, nothing could fully prepare anyone for being held at gunpoint by another law enforcement officer. As he entered his home, he was greeted by the comforting sounds of family life, laughter, conversation, and the aroma of dinner. It was a stark contrast to the intensity on the highway, and it reminded him of why he dedicated himself to public service in the first place: to protect life and ensure safety, both for strangers and for those he loved. Yet, even in the comfort of home, his mind turned over the lessons of the evening, the nuances that could have changed everything in an instant. The officer who had stopped him was already facing serious scrutiny. Within hours, the law enforcement agency initiated a full investigation. The officer had been arrested following the incident, highlighting the severity of holding a high-ranking official at gunpoint and the importance of accountability. This action underscored a critical message: mistakes, even when made under pressure, carry consequences, and adherence to proper protocol is essential. The director felt a mixture of relief and somber recognition. It was a reminder of the responsibility carried by every person in uniform and the impact of their decisions. The media had quickly picked up on the story, and it spread rapidly, igniting public conversation. People debated the circumstances, the officers' actions, and the potential dangers faced by law enforcement officers themselves. Some expressed disbelief that an FBI director could be stopped in such a manner, while others emphasized the need for systemic training and awareness to prevent similar incidents. The director did not seek publicity, but he recognized that this event could serve as an opportunity to address gaps in communication and coordination between federal and local law enforcement agencies. In the days following, the director reflected on his feelings of vulnerability during the stop. There had been a momentary fear that despite all his experience and authority, he could not control the outcome. That vulnerability, however, also brought a deeper understanding of human behavior, judgment under stress, and the importance of patience and calm communication. It reinforced the principle that even those with knowledge and power are not immune to the unexpected, and that empathy and reason are powerful tools in navigating tense situations. The FBI director shared his reflections with trusted colleagues. He spoke about the importance of continuous training, the need to reinforce human understanding alongside tactical skills, and the value of communication in de-escalating situations. He emphasized that even routine encounters could become unpredictable, and that awareness, patience, and empathy were critical to maintaining safety and professionalism. His insights were met with agreement, as officers understood that the human factor often dictated outcomes more than protocols alone. He also considered the young officer's perspective. The officer had followed procedure as best as he knew, reacting with the instincts of someone trained to respond quickly to potential threats. The director understood that fear, uncertainty, and responsibility could lead to errors in judgment. He reflected on the balance between accountability and understanding, recognizing that learning from mistakes is essential for growth and improvement in law enforcement. The incident also sparked discussions about public perception and trust in law enforcement. Citizens wanted to feel secure, knowing that officers were trained and vigilant yet also capable of discernment and judgment. The director considered the broader implications, how a single event could influence public confidence and highlight the importance of transparency and accountability. He saw the potential for positive change arising from this situation, using it as an example to promote better practices and awareness across agencies. In private moments, the director thought about his family and the relief he felt returning home safely. The juxtaposition of fear on the highway and safety at home emphasized the fragility and unpredictability of life. He appreciated the ordinary comforts, warmth, laughter, and conversation that reminded him why he committed himself to a career in public service. It was these human connections that grounded him, even amidst extraordinary responsibility. As the investigation progressed, the officer's actions were scrutinized thoroughly. Officials reviewed the protocols, the decision-making process, and the sequence of events that had led to the stop. The arrest and subsequent review highlighted the importance of strict adherence to procedure and the consequences of errors in judgment, reinforcing accountability within the ranks. The director followed these developments closely, understanding that systemic improvements were necessary to prevent similar incidents in the future. The director's reflections also turned inward. He considered how he had responded under extreme pressure, maintaining composure, using empathy and clear communication, and relying on his experience to prevent escalation. These skills, cultivated over decades, had been tested in a real and unexpected scenario, and he felt a renewed respect for the value of patience, discipline, and human understanding in critical moments. The experience became a personal benchmark, a reminder of the delicate balance between authority, responsibility, and human behavior. In conversations with colleagues, he shared the importance of preparation for unpredictable encounters. He emphasized that authority and experience alone are not sufficient. Emotional intelligence, communication, and patience are equally essential. The story of the roadside encounter became a teaching moment, illustrating that even the most trained individuals can face unexpected danger, and that resolution often depends on human understanding rather than force or protocol alone. The director also thought about the officer's future. While accountability was necessary, he hoped that lessons would be learned constructively. The incident could serve as a catalyst for improved training, better communication, and a heightened awareness of human psychology in high-stress scenarios. He recognized the potential for growth from difficult experiences, understanding that both individual and systemic improvements were possible when mistakes were addressed thoughtfully and responsibly. Weeks passed, and life began to normalize. The director returned to his routine, engaging in work with renewed awareness and reflection. Each day brought new challenges, but the memory of the roadside encounter remained vivid, a reminder of vulnerability, human perception, and the power of calm, thoughtful action. He carried forward the lessons learned, applying them in ways that strengthened both personal judgment and organizational practices. The public continued to discuss the event, using it as an example of the unpredictable nature of life and the importance of law enforcement accountability. Media coverage emphasized the rarity of the situation and the swift resolution, highlighting the professionalism of the director and the necessity of strict protocols. The discussion also reinforced the importance of empathy, clear communication, and human understanding in preventing escalation and maintaining public safety. Through it all, the director maintained a grounded perspective. He remained humble in recognizing the fragility of perception and the influence of fear, while committed to using the experience as a learning opportunity. The officer's actions, though mistaken, became a focal point for systemic improvement, accountability, and dialogue about best practices in law enforcement. The FBI director returned to work with a heightened sense of purpose. The event reinforced his belief in the importance of patience, empathy, and clear communication as tools for safety and effective decision-making. It reminded him that even in positions of authority, vulnerability is a natural part of the human experience. By acknowledging it and responding thoughtfully, one can navigate uncertainty successfully. In the quiet moments at home, he reflected on the entire experience: the tension on the highway, the careful communication, the resolution, and the aftermath. He understood the profound impact of a single encounter and the lessons it could provide for both individuals and the broader law enforcement community. The night had been harrowing, but it had also been instructive, illuminating the human dimensions of fear, responsibility, and the capacity for reason to guide behavior under pressure. Ultimately, the FBI director recognized that the event was more than a personal ordeal. It was a story of human complexity, accountability, and resilience. It was a reminder that training, experience, and authority must always be coupled with empathy, patience, and careful communication. And it was a testament to the fact that even in moments of fear and uncertainty, thoughtful, composed action could prevent disaster, preserve life, and create opportunities for understanding, growth, and improvement in the systems that protect us all.